Welcome to the SIGA special session on global leadership and anti-corruption in sport. I'm Katie Simmons, I'm SIGA's Global COO and Managing Director of the SIGA Women Programme, and I'm honoured to be your host today. We have a jam-packed hour ahead of us with a keynote address from the G20 in Italy on high-level principles and the action plan on sport integrity, delivered by Giovanni Tartaglia Polacchini, followed by Lorenzo Salazar, Deputy Chair of OECD Working Group on Bribery in International Transactions, General Prosecutor, Naples Appeal Court, Contact Point, Eurojust. Just a couple of highbrow titles there. We then move on to anti-corruption in sport and the path to prevention, followed by closing remarks from SIGA's Global Chair, Franco Frattini. But first, some opening remarks from SIGA's Global CEO, Chairman and CEO of SIGA America, Executive Chairman, SIGA Europe, it's our very own Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros.
Good afternoon. I felt it was important to be vocal in this day, the International Anti-Corruption Day, given SIGA's vision, mission, and in particular, sport's current state of affairs. And I felt it was important to speak with you plainly, bluntly, without euphemisms, face to face. I know that speaking about anti-corruption is a very unpopular topic. It's not that we don't know what the reality is. We do. It's not that we don't have the solutions. We do have the solutions. And they are called SIGA Universal Standards and SIGA Independent Rating and Verification System. They are the silver bullet. But we all know that those who benefit from corruption and its proceeds don't want it to be mentioned. They don't want us to address these topics. They don't want us to be addressing the dark side of sport. They want us to leave that dark side in the dark. And many sports organizations don't like it either, because they think, for some reason, that talking about this will affect their brand, their business, and drive fans away. I could not say more emphatically how wrong they all are. Let's face it. It's not by hiding the problems that we will solve them. It's not by turning a blind eye that these problems will go away. On the contrary, they will only escalate and get out of hand. So in this International Anti-Corruption Day, I ask each and every one of us to do this simple thing. Look ourselves in the mirror and ask, are we happy with the progress made so far? Is sport in better shape today than it was last year or the year before, as far as its integrity is concerned, and as far as public perception regards sport? Have we, sport, governments, international organizations, global business, civil society, have we done everything within our reach to effectively prevent and effectively root crime out of sport? What has happened? What has happened over the past 6-7 years since the FIFA Gate? What was the pace of change? How was this time used? So if we want really to have a frank discussion about anti-corruption in sport, certainly we cannot avoid addressing the elephant in the room. Or in better words, the elephants in the room, because there are more than one. And the first is, sport is facing an exponential corruption crisis on a global scale. In 2015, who has already forgotten? The image of banknotes showering former FIFA president Sepp Blatter at the press conference, and how this reverberated around the world. Although ostensibly a prank by a British comedian, the symbolism and the implication were abundantly clear, as well as the breadth, depth, an impact of the resignations, the bans, the charges, the prosecutions, the criminal convictions that soon followed, which seemingly signaled the end of an era of corruption in sport. However, as another wave of criminal investigations and prosecutions emerges from all around the world, including Italy, Portugal, Kenya, Croatia, Greece, Czech Republic, United States, Canada, and so many other countries, it is clear, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends in sport integrity, that lessons have not been learned from what happened in the past. This is the truth. The second elephant in the room is that sport needs a paradigm shift. Too often, we see and hear responses to incidents such as internal review, newly formed committee, dedicated special appointment, hiring, firing, self-assessment, and the like. We pull these rabbits as PR stunts out of the hat, as they would content public opinion and solve the immense crisis and reputational crisis affecting sport. And we assume, either naively or out of faith, that finally something meaningful is being done to root corruption out of sport. Let me be clear. These actions, as well intended that they are little more than empty gestures. The reforms that sport so clearly and urgently needs have not been implemented. I repeat, so there is no doubt. The reforms that sport should have implemented over the past 20, 15, 10, 5 years have not been implemented. And that is the truth. And I challenge anyone to come forward and demonstrate that I'm wrong. So we need to move from old rhetoric and old mentalities to real and meaningful cultural change. We know where the vulnerabilities are. As a result of a survey SIGA is releasing today demonstrates those vulnerable areas are related with club ownership investments and the financial flows that are associated with it. The use of investment funds, opaque financial flows, without scrutiny, without accountability, without oversight. How long do we need more to wake up? How long do we need to address these problems? They have been identified, they have been dissected, they are in open air. What does it take for international organizations, governments, lawmakers, sports governing bodies to assume their responsibility and put forth the solutions that are needed? How many more scandals do we want to see? How many more headlines do we want to see in the press about criminal investigations and prosecutions related with players' transfers and transactions and agents' fees, inflating transfer costs, empowering clubs' finances? And again, with the use of offshore vehicles and offshore transactions to escape the radar, to escape the filter, to escape scrutiny. We're just kidding ourselves. We're just fooling ourselves. And the longer it takes, the worse it gets. We also know where the causes are. What is the root of the problem? Because that root of the problem remains the same. Whether it is the lack of strong global leadership or the lack of real, consensual political willingness and courage. Courage, ladies and gentlemen. Courage that is lacking in governments and in sports governing bodies, many across the world. This is where the root of the problem lies. And this is what explains and facilitates corruption and all the spiraling criminality that sport has been victimized for so many years. And this is what leads to this culture and feeling of impunity. And we must say enough is enough. It's a moral imperative that we do. and we assume with courage and walk the talk. I'm fed up, to be honest, of talking about these topics. I am fed up of proposing solutions like an independent global clearinghouse to ensure financial integrity, transparency over all transactions in sport, be they related with players' transfers, agents' fees, or club ownership investments, or the commercial arrangements. I have been advocating this for more than 20 years. I have spoken with everyone that has responsibilities, from the FIFA president to UEFA president, to governments, to law enforcement, to financial system. Is this impossible? Is this rocket science? Is this brain surgery? Let us all assume accountability and responsibility for our own affairs. And speaking about clearinghouse, I'm not talking about training compensations. I'm talking about financial transactions related with players' transfers, agents' fees, and club ownership investment. This is where the problem lies. And the sooner it is addressed, the better for everyone. As our survey also demonstrates, people had enough. They know where the problems are. They also know what the reforms should be. We need governments to prioritize prevention and fight against corruption. But we need them to prioritize also money laundering, tax evasion, and similar crimes. I applaud the US Congress for enacting legislation that puts an end to shell companies and the financial opacity that hides obscure, opaque ownership structures and every suspicion that it legitimizes. But I am not happy, I am not content with the pace on things, how things have been dealt in many other organizations. We expect, we deserve faster and more tangible results. And with the same honesty and frankness, I also applaud the G20 for the amazing push that has been demonstrated under the Italian presidency. Espousing SIGA's views and long-term proposals, the G20 has, for the first time ever, elected anti-corruption in sport as one of its 3 top priorities for 2021, and has just approved a set of high-level principles on countering corruption in sport. What an example of leadership. It arrived late, but it arrived. And it must serve as an example, as an incentive, as an encouragement for governments and other international organizations to talk less, do more, and show results. This is what we citizens and civil society demand and expect. We need governments too, to establish as a precondition to grant public funding to sports organizations that they adopt the SIGA universal standards and go through the SIGA independent rating and verification system. This is taxpayers' money, our money, and there needs to be proper oversight, criteria, and accountability on how this money is spent. But that's not all. We need governments to give law enforcement and the judicial system the legislative, financial, and operational means that they need to do the job, as they need to enhance their knowledge, expertise, and capacity building. If we really want to win the war against corruption, not just one day a year, but 365 days a year in sport, in business, in government, in all sectors, we need a robust, adequate, up-to-date global legislation, not fragmented, inadequate, and obsolete legislation, which is precisely what we have at the moment. We also need sports organizations to show the leadership that there is within them, to walk the talk, to implement the SIGA universal standards on sport integrity, and go through the SIGA independent rating and verification system. The European Rugby League, as you all know, has just shown this leadership. And it has just shown 2 weeks ago, not only that this was possible, but it was doable. And they have done it with a great positive outcome. The next ones will include the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, UEFA, the Portuguese Olympic Committee, the Qatar Stars Leagues, and many more. We will announce this in due course. But we encourage, right here and right now, we encourage all sports organizations to live up to the expectations, to live up to this moment, to seize this opportunity and show to their fans, to their sponsors, to their broadcasters, to all those who invest their passion, their money, their trust in sport, that they too are fit for purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, we also need that those who have to contribute to a sport integrity fund, so that those who don't have may get access to the resources, the knowledge, the expertise, the capacity building that they need to enhance the way they govern themselves and operate. We need all that. And we need it now. Because now it's a time for action. Now is the time for each one of us to undertake our responsibilities, fearless. There will not be another chance to do it. Because sport, being critical in so many aspects of global society and intrinsic to the lives of so many people around the world, is in a deep crisis. A crisis of trust, a crisis of confidence, a crisis of integrity. So I ask you, will we let the future of sport be dictated, as it seems, by law enforcement and the courts, or by front pages in the media? What more will it take for us, all of us, sport, governments, international organizations, global business, civil society, to stand up and take action? Don't be afraid. Don't let yourself be intimidated by those within the system that try by all means to silence your voice. Join us. They will not silence us. We know who they are, but they will neither impress us nor intimidate us. Of this, I give you my word. Because there are no monopolies in the field of sport integrity. We are all custodians of sports values. And whether some like it or not, sport belongs to each and every one of us. We have the solutions. We have the roadmap. We have now a unique opportunity. And now is the time that we come together, that we must come together, stand with SIGA and press for change. I count on you. You know, you can count on us.
This is a crucial game.
This is a massive test.
Sports is a celebration that unites the world. But its values are under threat. Increasing cases of corruption, criminal infiltration and abuse are tarnishing its reputation. Winning cannot come at any cost. SIGA is the world's leading organization for sport integrity. Our goal is to provide trust, assurance and credibility in the industry. SIGA's independent rating and verification system serves pioneers better governed sports, financial integrity and transparency, sports betting integrity, and youth development. Sports organizations are the custodians of the game. SERVS is the assurance that they are fit for purpose. SERVS is the assurance that the reputation of sport and the wider industry are protected. Join our global movement. Be the leaders of change.
Hello, good afternoon, good night, or good morning, depending on where you are watching this special session. My name is Nuno Pastrello, and I am SIGA's Director of Communication and Media. Before starting the discussion on such an important matter as anti-corruption, whose day we are celebrating, we would like to share the results of a survey conducted among SIGA members and committed supporters. We drafted 2 simple questions and asked participants to rank their choices by importance. Each position was given a value, and by close of yesterday, we had interesting results. Question number 1 was, which are the most vulnerable areas in sport? Club ownership, including ultimate beneficial ownership, integrity checks, and financial transactions, got the highest score with 169 points. Right after, and close enough to say we almost have a draw, we have players, transfers, and related transactions with 164 points. Sport betting comes in the 3rd place with 134. Really close to sport betting, we also have youth protection and safeguarding with 130. Organization of major sport events got 103 points, and before the last question, the last option, which was others, we have commercialization of sport regarding sponsorship and broadcasting deals. After identifying the most vulnerable areas in sport, we also wanted to check among SIGA community which are the most pressing integrity reforms. Not surprisingly, the universal standards on sport integrity are on top with 230 points, the highest rating achieved in this survey. The establishment of a clearinghouse at national and international level for all sports-related financial transactions is in the 2nd place and in line with the results of the first question, confirming financial integrity as key to SIGA members and committed supporters. The 3rd place goes to independent integrity rating and certification of sports organizations, proving that SERVS is the solution, the silver bullet that SIGA developed for independent and neutral scrutiny. Commercial arrangements and public funding, ensuring that sponsors, broadcasters, and governments establish as a mandatory requirement that sports organizations are compliant with the highest integrity standards and are SERV certified, comes right after. The implementation of terms limits for the internal organs of all sporting organizations is next in line, prior to the creation of a sport integrity fund to support governance, reform, and extend resources where necessary, composed of a percentage of the commercial revenues, including, but not limited to, the selling of audiovisual rights and sponsorship deals. Ensuring targets for appropriate equality, inclusion, and diversity in the composition of boards of directors, executive committees, councils of sporting organizations is at the end of the list before the others option, but close enough to many of the other aspects, which makes self-evident that all those reforms are needed and the public perception values them as relevant. SIGA will keep this survey open in order to get more replies, and in January 2022, we will update the results, naturally taking them into consideration in future actions. Thank you very much.
Next on our agenda is a keynote from the G20 Italy on high-level principles and action plan on sport integrity, delivered by Judge Giovanni Tartaglia Polacchini, Chairman of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. Over to you, Giovanni.
Good evening and thank you for the kind invitation. I'm Giovanni Tartaglia Polcini and I led the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group in 2021. Corruption hampers sustainable economic growth, distorts market competition, undermines the rule of law, and erodes trust between citizens and governments. In normal time, corruption is a severe impediment to building prosperity and security for our countries and communities. Corruption heavily affects new areas that welcome more exposure to risk of and other sectors traditionally in the spotlight. Sport is a key example of these sectors, given the manifold threats that corruption and fraud may pose on the field and off the field. We can see exactly the relevance of the economic value of sport, and we need to protect sport from any corruption and malfeasance. We have to underline also the message of the value in the sport. We have a double misvalue when we have corruption in sport. We go to affect the dreams of young generations and also the hope of several billion of practitioners. Sport is a source of inspiration and shared values, a factor of progress and human fulfillment that moves billions of people around the world. Sports is also a fundamental driver for both economic growth on one hand and social inclusion on the other hand. Sport is a protagonist added value for the Sustainable Development Goals, constituting the core of the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations. A modern and holistic approach should recognize and consider how the new avenues of corruption thrive also in sport. And corruption has been acknowledged as an emerging risk area in sport also in past. We adopted in G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group activity an action plan in 2019, considering sport as an emerging risk area. But the increasing relevance of corruption in sport, both at professional level and amateur level, has inspired at the policy level several multilateral initiatives, such as, among others, the adoption of a political declaration by the first ever special session of the United Nations General Assembly hosted this year on 2 of June 2021, which refers to the importance of tackling corruption in sport and the adoption also of resolutions in the Conference of State Parties of the United Nations, the 7/8 entitled Corruption in Sport, and the 8/4 entitled Safeguarding Sport from Corruption. And the two conferences of the State Party I want to mention, we were hosting Vienna in 2017 and Abu Dhabi in 2019. But we had also in past, in one of the political declaration of the G20 in general as a whole, reference to corruption in sport as an emerging threat. So this year, under the Italian presidency, we decided, with the consensus of the group, to adopt a new policy document, a very new one, a strong and breaking document, the G20 High-Level Principles on Tackling Corruption in Sport. This document, I'm proud to say, is innovative and also is with a transformative message on the corruption in sport, with a great attention to the new threats we are considering, and especially the danger of the infiltration of organized crime in the sports sector through corruption as well as through money laundering. And so, if we list the principles we adopted, we can perfectly wonder and have in mind what's the level of the commitment of the G20 countries in this specific area. The principle 1 is entitled Gather Information to Develop an Evidence-Based Understanding of and Raise Awareness on Corruption in Sport. Please, let's say that this principle 1 give me the opportunity also to thank the SIGA for all its efforts and including on the multilateral agenda the corruption in sport as an emerging issue. The principle 2, strengthen legal and regulatory framework to address corruption in sport more effectively. The effective issue is one of the most important in this document. The third, ensure effective law enforcement against corruption in sport. And this is through the core business of our principles, because we have also to combine the special nature of sport as a private sector with difficult to recognize a role to the public sector without creating issues to the Olympic independence and autonomy. But this is not exactly what we want to do. We want only to ensure effective law enforcement against corruption in sport. The principle 4 is devoted to strengthen international cooperation among law enforcement, criminal justice and corruption prevention authorities, as well as lawmakers and policymakers to effectively tackle corruption in sport. And then the principle 5 is devoted to tackle corruption in sport related to organized crime, as I mentioned it before. And then the last one, but probably one of the most important, is support sports organization to enhance governance, transparency, accountability, ensure the integrity of major sports events, including associated procurement. Let's say that we are really proud of this policy document. It is fruit of a cooperation also with the private sector, business sector, with the United Nations, with the OECD, and also all the relevant actors involved in our debate during the meeting and outside the meeting all year long, and considering with a special thanks the Sport Integrity Global Alliance. Let me conclude saying also a few words on the other track that Italy is now developing all around the world, especially looking not only to the need of an harmonization at legislative level, also through mechanisms as G7, G20, United Nations, and others, but also nurturing the technical assistance and justice and security, considering and choosing the selected areas where it's possible to do our best to share experience, especially in prevention and tackling corruption and fighting against corruption and also organized crime. Our methodology is very simple to share. And in a nutshell, I will try to close my keynote speech to share with you also considering the sport. We need to have more capacity building on corruption in sport, both in the public sector and in private sector. We need to enforce and enhance, as I said, and including in the principles, the institutions devoted to prevent and dedicated to the fight against corruption in sport. We have to update our legal frameworks also in enforcing the laws and bills in prevention and combating corruption in sport. And at the end of this list, but not the not relevant, and I consider it crucial in this list, we have to build the consensus all around the world on the danger and on the need to tackle corruption in sport, building integrity, fighting any tolerance culture of corruption in sport. So we have 4 steps: capacity building, institutional building, law building, consensus building. If we nurture this way, probably we are creating the basis for a sustainable development also in prevention and fight against corruption in sport. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to Sport Integrity Global Alliance for all its efforts and cooperation at multilateral level.
Thank you, Giovanni. It's great to hear that sport is being given the recognition it deserves, and we look forward to deepening the SIGA relationship with the G20 under the new presidency as we move towards implementation. I'm Ian Lindsay, and I lead research and innovation at SIGA. I'm delighted to share some exciting news with you today and introduce the latest in our thought leadership initiatives, the Sport Integrity Journal. This free-to-access online publication will be released quarterly, with each edition focusing on a different sport integrity theme. Each edition will include interviews, opinion articles, and various other content that combine to showcase the most critical sport integrity matters from a range of perspectives and stakeholder demographics. We aim to be inclusive, diverse, and forward-thinking in our content. As such, I would like to extend an open invitation to all interested parties to engage with us moving forwards to help inform our content and participate. The first edition of the journal will focus upon global leadership and anti-corruption in sport. Corruption, as we know and have heard today, is a critical issue that threatens the future of sport and one that needs sustained and collaborative approaches to help address. The inaugural edition begins with a foreword by esteemed judge and SIGA chairman Franco Frattini, and it doesn't slow down from there. This is followed by an interview with the SIGA founder and global CEO Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros, who in his true indomitable style tells us like it is and plots the course for a future built on integrity. The articles that follow outline the challenges, efforts, risks, and dangers that corruption brings, and identifies potential solutions that could help anti-corruption efforts. The articles begin with Giovanni Tartaglia in the G20 and include respected practitioners and academics, such as Lorenzo Salazar and representatives from international organizations, law enforcement, global business, global research, and legal perspectives. There is much to learn, but more importantly, plenty of insight to build upon and use to inform and implement solutions. As I'm sure you will agree, the range, experiences, and level of insight of the contributing participants sets the bar extremely high for future editions, and we would want it no other way. The level of interest in this journal from all stakeholder groups has worked to not only validate the need for such a publication, but help to motivate us further to grow, improve, and deliver more and more with each subsequent edition. To these ends, interaction is needed from all of you, and my door is always open to discuss alignment and collaboration. The reason we created the journal was to create a dynamic and interactive catalyst for change rather than a static publication. As such, it is equal parts segue for future projects and a showcase for current best practice and cutting-edge evolution. It's long been crystal clear to us that alignment is crucial for meaningful change to occur. This is the one constant message that we encounter and the one that cuts across all of our varied and ongoing interactions with the diverse sports stakeholder community. At SIGA, this is a critical part of our reform agenda, and we are passionate about creating platforms and initiatives that are inclusive, accessible, and facilitative to these efforts. This journal is the latest in a suite of interventions designed to meet this demand. To enable us to deliver on these objectives and to achieve the long-lasting, far-reaching sport integrity reforms we are working towards, we rely on contributions from our members, our extensive network, and our like-minded stakeholders. I would like to end my intervention with a call to action. The second edition of the journal will focus upon female leadership in sport. It will be released in the margins of our thought leadership hybrid event, the SIGA Summit on Female Leadership in Sport, which will be hosted by MasterCard in New York on the 8th and 9th of March next year. If you would like to be involved in the second edition of the journal, either to share the benefits of your experience or showcase any relevant work streams, please contact me directly and we can discuss opportunities for alignment. In addition to this, if you would like to be involved in future thematic editions, would like to know more about sponsorship opportunities, or be involved in any of our other initiatives, please don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, I'd like to thank all the contributing authors for sharing their insights, and for all those of you that have shared their support, praise, and recognition for the journal. I hope you'll all enjoy reading this as much as I enjoyed bringing it together. Thank you for your time. Katie, back to you.
For our next keynote, I hand over to Lorenzo Salazar, Deputy Chair of the OECD, Working Group on Bribery and International Transactions, General Prosecutor, Naples Appeal Court, the contact point at Eurojust. Over to you, Lorenzo.
Hello, I'm Lorenzo Salazar. I'm a member of the Italian judiciary, and I'm at present Deputy Prosecutor General in the Court of Appeal of Naples. I'm also the Vice Chair of the OECD Working Group Against International Bribery. Today is the 9th of December. It is the International Day Against Corruption. And this yearly celebration, started in 2003, is not, in my view, a vain ceremony. It has the merit to call the attention of the international community over the destructive phenomenon of corruption, and at the same time on the initiatives aiming at tackling it. Both at national and international level, corruption and bribery deprive less wealthy countries and populations of precious resources which feed the dirty hands of few, instead of being used for growth and common welfare in the interest of many. I would also like to consider in particular this particular 9th of December as the first International Day Against Corruption in Sport. We all know that sport activities are not immune to corruption or criminal infiltration. The impressive and constantly growing amount of money involved by sports events provoke the appetites of criminals and organized crime. As demonstrated by investigations conducted in different countries, including the one I know the best, Italy, criminality may heavily infiltrate sports activities, in particular football matches. And in my judicial experience, I saw cases where organized crime was able to influence votes and political elections, thanks to the connections sometimes established with supporters groups and hooligans. 2021 will mark a turning point in the story of the fight against corruption in sport. It was only 2 years ago at the 8th Conference of the States Party to the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which took place in Abu Dhabi, that the resolution on safeguarding sports from corruption was adopted. Since then, 2 years ago, notwithstanding the pandemic, substantial progresses have been made. Under the Italian G20 presidency this year, 2021, the G20 high-level principles on anti-corruption in sport were adopted. so providing a first legal framework for a coordinated initiative in order to effectively prevent, detect in a timely manner, and counter corruption crimes in sport. The adoption of this high-level principle goes hand in hand with other, more pragmatic, if I may say this, initiatives, such as the launch of the Sport Integrity Journal, which will further call the attention of the professional and of the larger public on this crucial topic. The 9th of December is also the day for the official presentation to the public of the revised recommendation of the OECD Council for further combating bribery of foreign public officials in international business transactions. The new text updates the 2009 recommendation, which complements the 1997 Convention Against International Bribery and makes part of the OECD acquis. The revised recommendation was adopted after an intense process of negotiations among delegations and consultation with stakeholders, which took more than 2 years. The key topics emerged or significantly evolved in the anti-corruption area since 2009 have been included into new sections of the recommendation, such as addressing the demand side of foreign bribery cases in line with the orientations emerging in other fora, such, for instance, as the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, sanctions and confiscation, non-trial resolutions, introducing provision on the key principles and features of this mechanism, which appear to be used in nearly 80% of cases of international bribery, international cooperation, protection of reporting persons, incentives to companies for compliance, and finally, last but not least, data protection. Unfortunately, the proposal aimed to include the subject of corruption in sport inside the text of the revised recommendation was not retained by a majority of countries, not mine. Notwithstanding the absence of this subject in the present agenda of the OECD Working Group on Bribery, there is still an important lesson learned by the experience of this working group. This is about the importance of having a strong monitoring system to control the effective implementation of the instruments we put in place. The OECD Anti-Bribery Convention was effectively and has become a worldwide standard because, and I would say only because, there is an effective mechanism of peer evaluation in place for monitoring its full implementation by all parties to the convention. Also, the Magdalene Convention of the Council of Europe against the manipulation of sports competitions provides for a convention follow-up committee, but it seems not to have a real monitoring function on the effective implementation of the instrument. For this reason, I very much welcome the proposal from SIGA to put in place of universal standards on sport integrity and an independent rating and verification system, SIRBS, which may reveal very useful to restore people's trust in sport. Sport integrity rating and verification system is designed to assess, rate, and certify in an independent manner sports organization level of compliance with SIGA universal standards on sport integrity. To conclude, I cannot but express the wish that this very important step from SIGA will not only constitute an important achievement for enforcing sport integrity worldwide, but also a model for future initiatives in the same direction to be taken at a global or at a regional level. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Lorenzo. We reached out to some of the SIGA members and supporters over the last few days and asked a series of questions around anti-corruption in sport and the path to prevention. The first question is: sport is not immune to corruption or criminal infiltration. What are the most critical vulnerabilities and which measures should be prioritized to protect sport?
أنا معكم محمد بن ناصر المسند رئيس هيئة الرقابة الإدارية والشفافية في دولة قطر، ويسعدني مشاركة سيجا اليوم الاحتفال باليوم العالمي لمكافحة الفساد، وفي هذه الجلسة الخاصة بالقيادة العالمية ومكافحة الفساد في الرياضة. ونحن بلا شك نقدر الجهود التي تقوم بها سيغا لتعزيز النزاهة والشفافية في مجال الرياضة. إن الرياضة تلعب دورا رئيسيا في المجالات الثقافية والتربوية والاجتماعية والاقتصادية، إلا أن الفساد بإمكانه أن يقوض مجالات عدة بما فيها الرياضة، حيث أن الفساد يمكن أن يقوض إمكانات الرياضة ودورها في الإسهام في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة وغاياتها الواردة في خطة التنمية المستدامة لعام 2030. ومن أبرز هذه المسائل كل ما يتعلق بالتلاعب بالمنافسات والنتائج والمراهنات والاحتيال والرشوة، المنشطات، حقوق النقل ونقل اللاعبين المحترفين، وما قد يتبعها من جرائم تتعلق سواء بالاتجار بالبشر أو بعمليات غسل الأموال. لذلك لابد أن تكثف جميع الدول جهودها الرامية إلى منع ومكافحة الفساد في مجال الرياضة، وتشدد على أهمية التدابير التشريعية وتدابير إنفاذ القانون الصارمة، وأهمية التعاون والتنسيق وتبادل المعلومات سواء محلياً أو عن طريق الشراكات العالمية والدولية.
All organizations, sports included, need to take proactive measures to put policies, procedures, and protocols in place to enforce minimum standards of care as it relates to integrity and anti-corruption measures. Like any business, sports is not immune to issues and challenges as it relates to our product and our business. And it is incumbent upon all of us to take those active measures and proactive steps to protect the integrity of our game.
Sport is vulnerable to corruption most commonly in place of persons which do not have the adequate comprehension of ethics and moral guidelines that should be universal. Match fixing and in general, transactions involving investments in the sector are particularly sensitive issues. To better protect sports, we must act on those weak spots and make sure that sporting agents are well educated about sporting ethics and the consequences of corruption in sport and society, as well informing them clearly of the punishment which they may be liable to. The best way to fight corruption implies constant actions at three levels: more and better education, more and better rules that demand and implement good governance, and more and better monitoring and sanctioning regime.
Corruption in sport is a difficult, multifaceted challenge. It comes in many forms and degrees of seriousness, from petty bribes to large-scale influence peddling, fraud, and ultimately theft. It also encompasses a wide range of activities, from doping to illegal gambling, bribery, and match fixing. The challenge is varied, but the results are consistent. At a high level, grand corruption distorts the functioning of the state, benefiting leaders and resulting in theft from the people. At a lower level, corruption in sport breeds cynicism. In either case, the loss of integrity in sport equates to a decline of trust in the people. What is needed is a holistic response to this challenge, bringing law, standards of good governance, and an enhanced culture of integrity to bear in order to safeguard sport from the corrosive effects of poor governance. This is the role of SIGA.
For me, the most critical vulnerability is governance. We should stimulate sport entities to improve governance, transparency, and integrity.
The most critical vulnerability in sports integrity these days is the lack of global standards for good regulation of sports betting. Sports betting is a global activity, but regulated on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. And on top of being relatively poorly regulated, there's also a lack of enforcement throughout the world, which means that it's all too easy for betting fraud, match fixing to occur without consequence.
Really interesting, because obviously there's a history of corruption through sport, and obviously the pandemic may have opened up that door even further as sport has been really affected on a financial basis. So the opportunity for sport to try and find other ways to get itself out of in particular holes could open up very much so in this current kind of climate that we're in, an environment. And it's those type of things that could allow, you know, the wrong type of people to get involved in the sport and the corruption to really start to evolve. And it's that can then affect, you know, any sport really, but clubs, football, rugby, tennis, hockey, whatever it may be, they start to gain control, which then can put a lot of pressure on athletes, on other stakeholders within that environment to make decisions that go against their beliefs. And what we're importantly talking about here is integrity. So, as I said, it makes athletes vulnerable. It makes coaches vulnerable. It can make people working within those clubs or sports very vulnerable. And that's what we want to try and protect. And I think it's really important that we identify that and then highlight them in order to make sure that everything is genuinely being seen as transparent, so that we uphold the integrity of sport, which is so important for making sport what we want it to be, which is a community builder, and everybody to have that strong belief that sport can be something that crosses boundaries and is genuinely transparent and integral.
Global problems require global solutions, results-driven multi-stakeholder cooperation, and adequate allocation of resources. Is the sport industry winning the war against corruption? If not, what more needs to be done? Let's go to our supporters and members to see what they had to say.
First of all, I agree that sport is already a multi-billion industry where the global organized crime is interested, and we could say that there is a war. Many documents have been developed over the last 15 years and have included academic research papers, regulations, guidelines, evaluation methodologies, identification criteria for grant allocations, and involve numerous of stakeholders. Many sport organizations, governments, multi-government organizations, non-government organizations, and companies have developed set of principles, standards, and framework of good governance in sport. But what was missing during these years of preparation is action. This is what I will say what is needed, action. No single platform, procedure, or framework set the measures which will be commonly recognized by the sport organization, governments, and international organizations. Now I think SIGA is doing this.
In my opinion, sport is losing the battle against criminal infiltration and corruption. We have seen very recently a massive wave of scandals where human rights, integrity are putting behind other issues, notably political interests, economical interests, and it's time to change this outlook. On that regard, it is quite important to move from national and sectorial approaches working in silos to an overarching and comprehensive global approach. On that regard, it is quite important that not only like-minded organizations work in a multi-stakeholder collaborative partnership, but international organizations like the United Nations and the European Union demand more and regulate better the sports industry. Unfortunately, we have seen that self-regulation and autonomy of sport is not enough to pave the way on integrity issues.
Definitely, the sporting world is winning the war against corruption, and as technology takes more precedence and importance amongst the reporting platforms and systems toward the constituents, towards the people who are electing leaders, definitely the war against corruption is more won, and it's very clear to understand that leaders that are empowered into positions do have an accountability. In today's day and age, as we move to a more technological society, access to information and reporting mechanisms are highly developed and are utilized by the majority of the sporting federations. I believe that people which are choosing who should represent them have the right to access the actions and the movements of the leaders they are appointing to those positions. And I believe that empowering strong leaders who believe in the objective of the organization, who believe in promoting and growing that organization truly with passion, will supersede any type of interest to have personal gain, thereby, from the definition of corruption, be nullified. Choosing strong leaders is the solution in the future choosing leaders that have interests and passion in that sport, that are coming from that sport, that want to grow and support that sport, will be one of the biggest catalysts for removing any type of corruption from sport.
A multi-stakeholder cooperation, especially a global one, is fundamental. Each country has their own system or rule of law, and being a part in a global movement helps to strengthen the strategy in a local level.
Is the sporting industry winning the war against corruption? Well, clearly it hasn't been won, given the corruption scandals that we see ongoing in sport. And actually, I'm not sure we should think the war can ever be won. This is always going to be an ongoing fight, just because of the nature of humanity. And it's important to recognise that, while also noting the successes the sporting industry has achieved. I would say too that the reason it's so important not to believe the war has ever been won is because just because we don't hear about corruption doesn't mean everything is fine and we can relax. An absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, which means we need ongoing measures against corruption no matter what. So one of the problems, and particularly talking about the allocation of resources, is the metrics sporting organisations are usually judged on, which are growing revenues, growing the fan base, growing participation in the sport. Fighting corruption is not one of the key objectives of that thinking. So what needs to be done is for sporting organisations to make it part of their mission and explicitly part of their core values to have integrity at every level of the organisation. And the great thing about this is that if things are done at the highest level and done well right at the top, that tends to ripple out through the organisation, leading to higher standards at every level, right down to the action on the pitch, in the pool, or on the track. And to be clear, this anti-corruption stance covers a whole range of things, from match fixing and money laundering, but also say the hiring process for national team coaches, where the person should be properly vetted and not hired just because of who they know, so on and so forth. I think the point is very much that the greater the level of integrity from the top, the better everything in the sport will run, which benefits all the stakeholders. The organisation itself, the athletes, the fans, and the sponsors.
In terms of winning, I think what we've noticed is that people are starting to talk out. There's been a huge amount more awareness put in all these areas, and that's the start of it. And now it's about collaborating and really getting a driving force behind it, which is what SIGA is achieving and gaining that momentum in order to bring people together, create the right voice that can then have a mechanism to start the change. And so I believe that it's not so much about winning as much as it is about actually making the change start to happen, which I believe we're in a really good position to do and is happening. And with that, it needs to be on a global basis because sport is so global. And now we're more connected than ever. And again, the pandemic has just highlighted that. And so it's really important that we reach out into all areas, into all sports, and get that support and get that collaboration, which is only going to help create a bigger opportunity to change and create the integrity that we're all looking for.
SIGA is proposing a set of universal standards on sport integrity and a pioneering independent rating and verification system, SERVS, to restore trust in sport. Why is global regulatory reform and independent scrutiny so urgent?
إن الرياضة كأي مجال من المجالات الأخرى في تطور مستمر وتغيير مستمر، وكحال بقية المجالات تأثرت الرياضة بعوامل ومتغيرات عديدة مثل التكنولوجيا والتغير المناخي والتطور الإعلامي وغيرها من المتغيرات. وهذا التطور والتغير لابد أن يقابل كذلك تغيير وتطوير في مفاهيم التدقيق والمراقبة والحوكمة. لذلك يجب ولا بد من إيجاد مثل هذه المبادرات التي تعيد للرياضة بريقها، والتي تسمح للرياضة أن تتعامل مع المتغيرات الجديدة. وبالطبع مبادرة سيغا للتحقق من المعايير والتصنيف هي أحد هذه المبادرات الرائدة.
Independent scrutiny and tangible assessment are key to change a culture where non-compliance is prevailing. Why is that? Because if we don't change the cultural setting of sport governing bodies and sport organizations, we can have the better action plans and strategical approaches. But as you know, culture eat strategy at the breakfast. So it is quite important to have a good governance culture embedded within the sport organizations. And on that regard, instruments like SERVs, neutral, independent, and tangible, are quite important, not only to assess the compliance of sport organizations in terms of integrity, in terms of good governance, but to set a roadmap to tackle the main shortcomings in order to achieve a better environment in the world of sport, where integrity, where athletes' well-being are paramount.
SIGA's efforts to create a certification program are going to be key to the accountability that's required across sport, and to create the mechanism that allows sport to have specific and quantitative standards that hold us all accountable to the same benchmarks. These are essential because although every business is different and every sport is different, we all aspire to instill confidence through our fans and our key stakeholders and consumers in the underpinnings of the integrity of our game.
Universal standards lift the barriers that global sport has today. SIGA is the pioneer to set these standards. The standards are custom-tailored for individual sport organizations, and the difference in their resources, capability, and capacity, all of which have an impact on the ability to implement the governance reform, and within a strict timeline, is taken in consideration. Sport organization will be guided how to incorporate and implement the universal standards according to their individual features. There are 3 so-called medals to achieve: bronze, silver, and gold, reflecting good, better, and the best practice. SIGA is leading the organization through the whole process, making monitoring and helping to improve good governance. The purpose of sport integrity rating and verification system is to assess the sports organization's level of implementation of the compliance. And why all this is needed? It's needed to restore the trust, to attract new partners, and to have fair play.
Independent scrutiny is a critical component of good governance. Without it, there's no accountability for performance and no basis from which to improve. SIGA's development of an independent rating and verification system will enhance confidence in participating organizations by providing them a concrete set of metrics, an independent assessment of performance against those metrics, and a basis for which the organizations can improve their performance and for the public to judge their integrity. Such a cycle of metrics, transparency of performance, accountability for performance, and improvement is necessary for better governance. And voluntary standards such as SIGA's are a key complement to global and national regulatory regimes.
Sport is interesting because of its history. Federations and sporting organisations were often set up in a time before there was much money in whichever sport it was. And the people behind setting up the organisations were people who loved the sport. And back then, in terms of legislation and regulation, sport wasn't recognised as much more than a pastime. So it was basically ignored. But sport has changed so much now. It's a massive multi-billion-dollar industry that affects every facet of human life, usually very beneficially. But often the organisations running these sports have not evolved in line with the size and the importance of the operations they're in charge of. And from the scandals we've seen, what we know is that there are many areas in sport where there needs to be reform in order to both uncover corruption and, even more importantly, to prevent it. Another aspect of this is the requirement for independent scrutiny, because just like in the legal world, where there's a fairly basic tenet, is that justice has not only to be done, but also to be seen to be done. That's the same here with the reform of the organisation of sport. It has to not only be governed fairly and with integrity, but it has to be seen to be done so too. The fans and the sponsors have to be able to see this taking place. Transparency is key. Of course, there are so many decent people in sport who are looking out for the best interests of the game, but without proper independent scrutiny, doubts will often persist over whether things are actually being done correctly. Was there nepotism? were there personal favours? Was there vote rigging or match fixing? The only solution to that is independent scrutiny. And this is so important because fans and sponsors need to know that the sport they dedicate their time and resources to is clean. And where you have integrity, that creates a virtuous circle because it helps the sport to grow. The main point here is that if there isn't global regulatory reform and independent scrutiny, we could end up in a situation where the impact of sport on society, taken as a whole, is in fact more harmful than beneficial. And that's a horrendous prospect.
Global regulatory reform is vital, particularly in the area of sports betting regulation. Firstly, because there is no global overview on how this should be done. While certain countries have applied fantastic regulation, most of the world lags behind in that. And then it is for sport to have independent scrutiny, because sport has shown itself over and over and over again to be incapable of self-regulation. And so an independent outside authority that works with sport to promote sports integrity and works with sports betting regulation and sports betting regulators with real enforcement powers is the recipe for really making a sea change in the fight against sporting corruption.
What are the key threats, risks, and opportunities that sport needs to consider to ensure it successfully recovers with integrity?
There are a number of threats posed to the integrity of sport, including match fixing, results manipulation, illegal gambling, doping, corruption, discrimination, and unethical behavior. The most significant risk is that the more popular sport becomes, the more economic interest there are, and the more risk to sporting integrity there is. There is an expression that crime does not pay, but unfortunately, the economic relevance of sport makes more individuals think otherwise. As for opportunities, I would simply say that it is the awareness of the existence of the problem and the will to attack it. The best way to help the patient is to make him recognize that he is sick. Today, there is a recognition of the existence of activities that put sporting integrity at risk and the collective feeling to fight them. This is the moment to attack and to follow SIGA's advice. I would like to terminate by emphasizing that participation in sport should be based upon the concepts of fairness, respect, safety, and personal and collective responsibility. Thank you very much.
The pandemic has provided us all with an opportunity to review our priorities and to ensure that we are investing in the key aspects of our business that will fuel our growth. Those areas will include things that are directly tied to revenue, as well as areas that involve policymaking and minimum standards of operating that our league and all leagues will need to ascribe to in order to continue to generate engagement with fans for our growth.
The fight to bring better governance to sport globally takes place in a very complex environment, impacted by global and national politics, competing priorities around economics, national security, responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and on and on. Key to addressing all of those challenges is good governance, of course, at the global, regional, national, and subnational levels. However, in the world's efforts to respond to these challenges, the need for cooperation often gets lost in the pursuit of national self-interest. The fight against corruption in sport faces this challenge as well, falling too far down the list of priorities for real progress to be made. This is why the work of an organization like SIGA and an opportunity like International Anti-Corruption Day to highlight the importance of the fight is so key to keep pressure on global leaders to continue to make progress on this important issue.
The main threat for now is COVID-19 pandemic that is not allowing us to meet and communicate and help to develop sport integrity and to fight corruption and promote the brighter future of the sport. And we shall not forget that this recovery is going to be a long process, and we shall continue our mutual efforts to support the athletes and sport organizations to come out of the crisis even stronger and more resilient. During the last 2 years, even more attempts for corruption and manipulation have been done. Educational program for athletes, coaches, referees has to be put in place. Moreover, Multiplication of this educational program has to be done by training the trainers. The main risk for me is the human being nature and the moral and ethics that can easily be compromised. The integrity in sport is like a culture. Sports society has to be educated. Strict rules and high standards will support the process. And because I'm always very positive and great optimist, I believe that there are many new opportunities that this recovery, this change can bring. Transparency will give assurance that organization leaders has an honest and fair approach. From another side, will make the sponsor and funding organization to trust and feel comfortable to be associated with the sport sector. Sport integrity rating and verification system is what the sponsor and those that invest in sport are demanding to be given to them and to be certain that their investment are protected from the risk of reputational damage. So SIGA is a game changer that's in the sport industry.
The two principal current threats to sporting integrity are the lack of global regulation around sports betting and, in particular, the lack of understanding and regulation around the use of cryptocurrencies. These two factors combine to create a very dangerous environment for sport where payments can't be tracked and poor enforcement of poor regulation means that the chances of getting away with it, both on the side of the criminals committing the betting fraud and the sportsmen creating the match manipulation, are quite high and increasing. So as sport, civil society, government, regulators and law enforcement and sponsors and broadcasters, we need to come together to create a holistic environment where sports corruption and the lack of integrity in sports betting is addressed by everybody with joined up standards and thinking.
I'm guessing that by recovers we are meaning of coming back from the COVID pandemic situation. Sport, in my opinion, is the one best lesson and the one best teacher for integrity. It is an activity that allows us to understand that we should work for not only personal gain, but for the gain of the team, for the gain of the sport, for the gain of the humanity. I believe that integrity needs to be taught at the foundation levels. And this is a reason why at the ISF, following our great collaboration with, I think, the highest expert on integrity, Ian, is the right direction for understanding that we need to be involved in the education of the youth, in the building of their foundations, and to build a foundation of integrity. Now, sport itself, I can tell you for the International Esports Federation, the people that are working in the ISF are working passionately to develop the sport. And of course, maintaining integrity in all aspects of activity, because it is only by maintaining integrity that we are able to set a good example for the youth and to shed all light on the active projects that are taking place in a positive way without touching upon the negative aspects that could potentially surround sport. And I'd like to add to that esports is a developing sport. So the ISF was founded in 2008. We've just finished now our 13th World Championships. We're working now on the 14th this coming year. We are building the sport up. We are at the beginning of the path. And although big and although the spotlight and attention is on esports, I can guarantee you that the board of the ISF, the entire esports ecosystem, is fully invested in ensuring that we are developing in a way that promotes integrity and that teaches integrity to the future leaders of esports.
A huge thank you to all our valued supporters for continuing to stand with SIGA on our journey to create a better governed industry worthy of the trust of the fans, the sponsors, and all those that invest their time, money, and reputation in the game. Before I hand over to our SIGA Global Chairman, Franco Frattini, to deliver the closing remarks, from myself, Katie Simmons, and the SIGA team, we wish you and your loved ones a truly special festive season. And we look forward to reuniting again in 2022 with renewed energy. Franco, it's over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the International Day Against Corruption is marking a clear and important common objective, the one of reducing and then eradicating corruption from all the fields. But SIGA in particular is focusing on sport corruption. Why? Because SIGA has achieved a very important experience based on evidence, based on facts, based on events. Corruption in sport, unfortunately, is evolving, is being aggravated by different factors that we have to address. G20 Italian presidency did it, and it recognized the very important contribution proposed and offered by SIGA through suggesting ideas, practical solutions. I think about, for example, independent verification systems. But also, we note the growing phenomenon of corruption in different fields of sport. I have in mind the very recent scandals. I think about, first of all, of my country, Italy, where we have serious investigations carried by finance police about serious and very broad manipulations of budget, of financial data, of crossing, buying and selling football players in order to get money, in order to hide profit, or in order to hide hyperdimension of spending without paying taxes. This is another very concerning aspect. Apart what is happening in the field of sport with organized crime. Organized crime is attracted by sport. It is attracted because the sport is proving to be a very profitable field for criminal organizations. Criminal organizations, in some cases, want, for example, to buy a small size football team just to clean their picture in a given territory and to continue their activity as a mafia gang. Or they want to have relations with sport entities and sport teams just to launder money. Money laundering in the field of sport, dirty money in the field of sport is an international phenomenon, as well as corruption is. Corruption requires commonalities of points of view, and SIGA is championing this by suggesting in America, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, common visions and common points. My clear point in the day International Day Against Corruption is the following. Only if we share best practices, only if we put together public and private sector, only if we involve law enforcement as well as the public institutions dealing with sport, only in this case we will succeed. This is a challenge for SIGA. I'm very proud to be the chairman of SIGA and working with the CEO of SIGA, his staff, and all people that have in mind only one thing. One day we will have to have international, global standards to destroy corruption in the field of sport. Thank you very much.
This is a crucial game.
This is a massive test.
Sports is a celebration that unites the world. But its values are under threat. Increasing cases of corruption, criminal infiltration and abuse are tarnishing its reputation. Winning cannot come at any cost. SIGA is the world's leading organization for sport integrity. Our goal is to provide trust, assurance and credibility in the industry. SIGA's independent rating and verification system serves pioneers better governed sports, financial integrity and transparency, sports betting integrity, and youth development. Sports organizations are the custodians of the game. SERVS is the assurance that they are fit for purpose. SERVS is the assurance that the reputation of sport and the wider industry are protected. Join our global movement. Be the leaders of change.